In the chronicles of medieval warfare, we often find moments where strategy crossed into cruelty in ways that even hardened knights and kings could not fully accept. Some methods terrified enemies so deeply that they left behind not only fear, but also condemnation from churchmen, chroniclers, and later rulers. Over time, these tactics were singled out, restricted, and eventually banned, becoming examples of how far was too far, even in an age built on conflict. Number 1. Boiling liquid defenses. During the sieges of medieval England, defenders relied on many methods to keep attackers away from the walls, but none carried the same fear as boiling liquid. When an army placed ladders against a castle wall, or pushed a battering ram toward a gate, defenders had only seconds to stop them before the breach widened. One of the most effective ways to break the momentum was to pour scalding substances down from above. Many people imagine barrels of olive oil being tipped, but in truth, oil was expensive and rare in England. Defenders usually heated water, animal fat, or even mixtures of kitchen broth. Sand roasted over fire was another weapon because it slid easily into every opening in a knight's armor. Once it reached the skin, it caused deep burns that could not be treated quickly. Pitch and resin were also used, sticking to metal and leather until flames caught and spread. Castles were designed with this tactic in mind. Gatehouses often had vents directly above the entrance, allowing boiling liquid to be released at the exact spot where attackers worked the hardest. Stone projections known as machicolations were built along the parapets so that defenders could safely drop substances straight down. Some garrisons built temporary wooden galleries called hoardings that let them position kettles over the enemy. These structures gave the defenders an advantage because they could time the pour to strike when soldiers were most vulnerable. A single moment of hesitation on the ladder often turned into a chain reaction of panic as men behind pushed forward while those above tried to retreat. Horses caught in these attacks were especially at risk, since a sudden splash across the face or chest could send them rearing back into their own lines. The scenes were gruesome. Chroniclers describe men screaming as steam rose from their armor, stumbling blind as they tried to escape the wall. Soldiers who survived carried scars for life, and in many cases, the injuries were worse than sword wounds. The cruelty of the method was clear, and it drew criticism even from those who accepted the harshness of war. Priests preached against it, calling it an unchristian act, while some knights argued that it stripped battle of honor. There was also the practical issue that fuel and water were valuable resources inside a besieged castle. Keeping large kettles constantly boiling required wood that might be needed for heating or cooking, so commanders were forced to use it sparingly. Supporters of the tactic argued that it saved lives in the long run. If boiling water could break one assault, then the attackers might abandon the siege entirely, sparing the town from a bloody storming where every street would run with blood. Opponents countered that it inflicted unnecessary suffering, especially when prisoners or envoys were caught in the attack. Over time, a compromise emerged. Customary rules began to forbid the use of boiling substances on men who had surrendered or who came under a flag of truce. Some military ordinances in late medieval England even included notes advising commanders to avoid scalding unless absolutely necessary, because it damaged their reputation and made future negotiations harder. By the 15th century, boiling liquid defenses had not disappeared, but they were far less common. Manuals of siegecraft from that period show more focus on artillery, mines, and disciplined sorties rather than heated sand or tar. The memory of earlier horrors lingered, however. Chroniclers made sure to record the cries of men burned alive, and their words shaped how later generations saw this tactic. What had once been considered a normal part of castle defense slowly turned into an example of cruelty that went beyond the limits of war, leaving it marked as a practice that should not be used again. Number 2. Foul corpses as weapons. Medieval warfare did not rely only on blades and arrows. During hard sieges, commanders looked for tools that could break morale faster than a battering ram. One of the harshest methods was to use dead bodies as weapons. The idea was simple. If you could not bring down the wall, you could bring panic into the town behind it. Trebuchets and mangonels hurled more than stones. crews loaded carcasses of animals from nearby fields. They also launched the bodies of fallen soldiers. The goal was to foul streets, courtyards, and water points. Defenders had to work in the stench. Their spirits dropped as days passed with no relief from the smell. Garrisons feared the effect on wells most of all. A fortress lived by the water inside its walls. If the source turned foul, the fight shifted in a single day. Attackers sometimes dragged carcasses to the curtain and dumped them into streams that fed a town. Others packed offal into jars and smashed them over cistern mouths. People in the Middle Ages did not understand microbes. They did understand that rotting matter brought fevers. Once a fever spread among a cramped population, watches grew thin, and gates could not be held at full strength. The method also worked as a form of psychological pressure. Bodies thrown over a wall forced defenders to see their future. Every arrival told them that burial would be delayed or denied. That cut deep in a culture that valued proper rites. Priests served in garrisons to comfort the sick and to bless the dead. When siege engines made respectful burial impossible, people read it as a sign that God had turned his face away. Panic, then, did what catapults could not. English practice shows another side to this tactic. After rebellions or battles, severed heads were mounted on gates and bridges. The message was aimed at the living outside the walls. Do not try this again. London Bridge became a warning stage during several reigns. To a modern audience, that display looks like a separate tradition. Yet it worked like the same weapon. A corpse became a signal that traveled farther than a rider. It spoke to thousands who passed under it. In a siege, the message moved in the other direction. The attackers spoke to those trapped inside, with the same language of fear. Effectiveness came with risks. A camp that handled rotting matter carelessly invited sickness among its own ranks. Wind direction could shift smoke and smell towards the siege lines. Crews who worked the engines stood near the payload. They needed cloths over nose and mouth and fires to burn waste. Commanders had to weigh the short gain against the chance of crippling their own army. In wet weather, bodies splashed down and spread less. In heat, they created problems for everyone within range. The tactic was never a simple choice. Moral resistance grew as these scenes repeated. Clergy argued that a corpse deserved burial. Canon law treated the dead as under the care of the church. Desecration did not only harm enemies, it placed the souls of the abusers at risk. Knights who cared about honor heard the same warning from a different angle. Victory should come from courage, not from cruelty that lingered after the fight. Chroniclers recorded their disgust at commanders who mixed the bodies of the dead with tools of war. Those passages shaped reputations that lasted long after a siege ended. Customary limits formed around these arguments. Truces to collect the dead became more common in long sieges. Some garrisons offered to open a postern at dawn, so each side could gather bodies outside bowshot. Those arrangements did not always hold, yet they appeared often enough to show a trend. Civic leaders inside towns also set rules for waste handling during a siege. They covered cisterns. They moved markets away from splash zones. They enforced quick burial beyond the nearest gate when the situation allowed it. The practice declined as artillery improved. Cannon gave attackers a more predictable path through masonry. Disease and fear were no longer the main levers. A breach could be forced by metal shot rather than by tainted air. The older tactic did not vanish at once, but it lost its central place. Later writers looked back and placed it with other acts judged too cruel for use. They pointed to the denial of burial, the spread of sickness among non-combatants, and the long shadow that such choices cast over any peace that followed. In that memory, corpses used as weapons became a line that should not be crossed again. Number 3. Smoke mines and suffocating undermines. In medieval warfare, the quickest way to bring down a strong wall was often not with ladders or rams, but with a mine dug quietly beneath the foundations. Miners worked with picks and shovels, propping their tunnels with timber and keeping their fires hidden until the right moment.